The first thing I touch is not a throne. It's brick, baked hard as fired bone, slick with damp, still warm from the day's heat, and cold where the night has begun to breathe. I'm crouched in a narrow lane of Mohenjo-daro, and a drain mouth yawns open like a small, square wound. Inside it, the smell is sharp, wet earth, stale water, a trace of ash, like a city trying to exhale. If this drain stops working, the city does not merely smell. It sickens. It empties. It dies without a battle. Listen closely. You can hear the whole civilization in miniature, water dropping into a clay trap, sandals scraping brick, a child coughing in a courtyard, a jar lid turned with a careful twist, a stamp seal pressed into soft clay with a practiced thumb. A city of almost no monuments, no conquering inscriptions, no king's face carved 10 cubits high, yet it runs on something more fragile than a royal command. It runs on maintenance. It runs on trust. Tonight, there is a clock in the air. The monsoon is due, soon enough to make men glance up when the wind changes, soon enough to make a mother count grain twice and then once again. There is another clock too, the trading cycle, the next caravan, the next boat downriver, the next promise from far away that beads and copper and shell and lapis will come and go like blood through veins. If the rains arrive wrong, late, thin, furious, or the roots fail, the city's engineered equilibrium snaps. And when equilibrium breaks in a place built on systems rather than spectacle, the collapse looks like a magic trick, streets remain, people vanish. I keep my case files as I always do, by touch, not romance. Evidence first. In a storage room, under a low ceiling that holds heat like a palm, we find the witness, a small stamped seal carved from pale steatite, its surface polished smooth by years of handling. An animal, unfamiliar, composed, deliberate, stands under a row of signs that we still cannot read. Beside it, a clay ceiling, dull brown, bearing the negative impression of that same seal, proof that someone once closed a jar or tied a bundle and wanted the world to know it was honest. And beside that, the quietest weapon of the Indus, a standardized cubical weight, neat as a die, heavy for its size. This is how you govern without a crown, measure, certify, repeat. Now I want you to meet our cast. Not heroes in epics, but the people who keep a city alive. First, the seal clerk. He is not a poet. He is a man with ink-stained nails, if not ink, then soot and pigment, whose thumb is calloused from pressing seals. His work is identity, accountability, shipment after shipment. He knows the difference between a fair weight and a shaved one the way a surgeon knows the difference between healthy tissue and rot. He believes, with religious intensity, that standardization is morality. If the seal loses authority, he loses the city. Second, the drain keeper. A municipal laborer, engineer, sweeper, unclogger, whatever title you wish to grant the person who spends his days in the places everyone else avoids. He carries a basket, a scraping tool, sometimes a torch. He knows where the slope fails, where the bricks loosen, where silt gathers like conspiracy. He does not speak in speeches. He speaks in repairs. His war is against stagnation. Third, the caravan master. Leather strap across his shoulder, dust in his hair, a mind that maps distance like a second heartbeat. He hears rumors before councils do, a ford that is no longer safe, a town that demands a new toll, a river mouth that has silted, a market where Mesopotamian buyers have grown scarce. He is not sentimental about cities. He goes where profit and safety agree. When he hesitates, the whole urban machine trembles. And fourth, a family at a courtyard well. A mother, a grandmother, perhaps an uncle, children with wet hair clinging to their foreheads. Their stake is simple and brutal. If the well water turns bitter, if it sinks too low, if it carries sickness, ideology doesn't matter. They will move, or they will bury someone, or they will fight their neighbors in the dark. Civilizations end in ledgers, yes, but also in kitchens. Our objective is clear. We are solving a vanishing act. Did violence break into cities, or did systems, water, food, trade, fail so thoroughly that people chose to leave? Why do the streets remain, grids and drains and wells, while the people thin out? And why does no conqueror claim the prize? In history, that silence is rarely accidental. Let's open the file. The timeline is our first instrument, like laying a body on a table and checking rigor mortis before you decide cause of death. Around 3300 to 2600 BC, early Harappan communities grow region by region. They experiment, crafts, trade, settlement patterns. Nothing inevitable yet. Then, from about 2600 to 1900 BC, the mature Harappan phase. Peak urbanism. Harappa. Mohenjo-daro. Dhalavira. Standardized weights like the one in my palm. Baked brick architecture, engineered drainage, wells so numerous you begin to understand the city as a machine for water. Long-distance exchange reaches Mesopotamia, where texts speak of a place called Meluha, and merchants from that far edge arrive with exotic goods and foreign languages. This is a world system without an emperor. Then, roughly 1900 to 1300 BC, a localization and transformation. Urban centers contract. The obsessive standardization softens. Settlements shift eastward and toward different ecological zones. The civilization does not explode. It rearranges, and that is the mystery. Because archaeology is good at finding the dramatic. It struggles with a quiet exit. Now, places become evidence. Mohenjo-daro gives us those iconic drains and wells, and in later phases, we see stress, rebuilding that looks less uniform, maintenance that looks more hurried, a kind of architectural tiredness. Harappa offers cemeteries and late occupational layers that whisper transition rather than one clean annihilation. Dhalavira, out in Kutch, stands like a lecture in water strategy, reservoirs, management features, proof that controlling water wasn't a background detail. It was central doctrine. And then the Gagahakra region, often linked in older literature to the Sarasvati, in many sites, clustered like beads on a thread, suggesting a river system that changed substantially over time. Rivers do not just water cities. They decide where cities are allowed to exist. Let's talk technology, because technology is where optimism becomes dependency. Baked brick is durable and precise, and it is expensive in the way that matters most, fuel. To kill fire brick at scale, you need wood, labor, organization. A decline in baked brick can signal economic strain, deforestation, fuel scarcity, or simply a shift in priorities when survival becomes more immediate than perfection. Standardized weights and measures, this little cube, function like a commercial nervous system. If standardization erodes, market trust degrades, taxation or storage regimes, formal or informal, become harder to enforce. You can survive a drought, it's harder to survive a drought plus cheating. Urban sanitation, the drains, the soak pits, the wells, is high maintenance. Collapse here is rarely dramatic. It is incremental neglect, one drain left clogged because the drainkeeper is sick, one soak pit not cleared because the budget of time and labor is consumed by crops, one well contaminated because floodwater carried waste where it should not. Trade logistics, beads of carnelian, shell ornaments, metals, create specialist livelihoods. If Mesopotamian demand falters or routes become riskier, specialists lose income and cities lose glue. In a city, glue is often the rail foundation. So where is the battlefield? Not at a wall under siege. The conflict is internal, logistical, water allocation, grain storage, and the politics of who gets the reliable well when scarcity hits. The battlefield is the floodplain and the granary ledger. The weapons are shovels, seals, and decisions made at dusk. And now, we interrogate suspects. Suspect A, invasion or violent destruction, the classic Aryan invasion narrative that once sat like a heavy stone on popular imagination. Its best argument is seductive because it offers a villain with a name. Later Vedic texts, composed much later, speak of conflicts and migrations. It is tempting, almost irresistible, to map those stories onto the decline of Indus cities. And then there's the sensationalized claim, a handful of human remains at Mohenjo-daro, once paraded as evidence of a massacre, bodies in the street, a city taken by storm. It makes for a clean story, the sword replaces the seal. But a detective earns their supper by resisting clean stories. Cross-examination begins with what conquest usually leaves behind. Do we see consistent, widespread burn layers across major Indus cities? Do we find the unmistakable signature of coordinated destruction, charred administrative centers, toppled fortifications, mass graves aligned in one moment of terror? We do not. The so-called massacre at Mohenjo-daro is widely considered an outdated interpretation. The remains come from different contexts and times rather than one clear death horizon. And material culture changes look gradual and regionally varied, like an unspooling rather than a guillotine drop. Invasion must explain not only death, but the missing evidence of triumph. Now, could there have been violence? Of course. Human beings do not become gentle merely because their drainage is sophisticated. But the invasion narrative, total, decisive, city-ending, fails the forensic test in its strongest form. It explains too much too quickly, and it ignores the slow failures that are actually visible in brick and silt. Suspect A stays on the board, but the alibi is shaky. Suspect B, climate weakening, monsoon instability, the so-called 4.2K event as stress multiplier. Here, the evidence is not a spear point but a sequence of signals buried in lakes, caves, marine cores, records that show monsoon intensity weakening after the mid-Holocene optimum, and aridity episodes around 2200 BC. A civilization tied to seasonal water predictability becomes vulnerable when rainfall becomes erratic, too little, or concentrated in destructive bursts. Imagine the farmer's calendar losing its meaning. Imagine planting because tradition says now, and watching the sky refuse the contract. Climate does not negotiate with rituals. But climate is not fate in one stroke. Stress does not automatically equal abandonment. Societies can adapt: irrigation, crop changes, political centralization, migration strategies. And the Indus had engineering strengths. So we must ask, if they could build drains that still impress modern engineers, why couldn't they handle a wobbling monsoon? Then we remember timing. Not every site declines simultaneously. The patterns vary by region. That suggests climate is a driver, but not a single switch you flip from city to ruin. Here is how I would phrase it in the war room: climate is pressure. It squeezes every weakness already present. It turns minor inefficiencies into mortal risks. It makes maintenance expensive. It pushes people into competition. But pressure alone rarely chooses the precise moment a system breaks. Suspect C, river avulsion and hydrological betrayal, channels shifting, drying, flooding differently. This suspect is quiet, patient, and devastating. Many Indus settlements cluster along ancient river courses. If a major channel migrates, it can strand cities from water and from trade routes in a single generation or two, fast in human terms, slow in geological ones. Geological and geomorphological work suggests major river systems in the region changed course over time. And if your urban planning assumes stable flows, if your wells, your drains, your fields, your transport all rely on a river behaving like a reliable colleague, then the river's decision to move is not a natural event. It is a political catastrophe delivered by physics. A city can be conquered by a bend in a channel. But again, the alibi matters. Not all cities sat on the same river. Coastal and deltaic sites have different risk profiles. And river change can be gradual. People often move in stages, leaving a patchwork decline rather than a single the day the river died. So we cannot reduce everything to one vanished channel. Yet when you stand in the grid of Mohenjo-daro and ask why no conquering army bothered to claim it, hydrology begins to feel like a suspect with motive. Rivers steal value before armies arrive. Suspect D, economic and political decentralization, cities lose advantage, villages win. Here, the evidence is in the slow erosion of sameness. Later phases show reduced standardization and more regional styles, consistent with fragmentation or localization. If long-distance trade weakens, urban craft specialization becomes fragile. People return to mixed subsistence strategies. A bead maker without a distant buyer becomes a farmer with a memory of beads. A city without trade becomes a burden. But decentralization is not always voluntary. We must not romanticize dispersal as if it were a peaceful picnic into the countryside. People may decentralize because governance fails, because inequality rises, because water becomes a fight, because disease stalks clog drains. And we also must remember, the Indus world does not advertise its politics to us with royal inscriptions. We are reconstructing institutions from bricks and weights and spacing between houses. When evidence is quiet, certainty must be quieter. So which suspect did it? You may want one culprit, one clean answer. That desire is ancient. It is also dangerous. Because what I see in this case is not a single murderer. It is a conspiracy of conditions. And conspiracies are how complex systems die. Let's return to daily life under crisis, because this is where collapse stops being an academic term and becomes a smell, a taste, a fear you carry into sleep. Maintenance failure, drains clog, wells contaminate, mosquitoes rise. Public health becomes a silent siege. No army needed. If stagnant water breeds fever, and children begin to die in numbers that feel abnormal, people stop trusting the city as a safe machine. They begin to see it as a trap made of brick. Food security, shifting rainfall changes crop calendars, storage shortfalls turn neighbors into competitors. You can feel the social temperature rise when grain jars are not as full as they should be. And then there is trust failure, the most underappreciated weapon in this story. When weights and seals no longer guarantee fairness, markets fracture. Violence can become intimate, household level, not armor level. A dispute at the well. A theft at night. A feud that spreads like oil on water. The civilization that ran on verification begins to run on suspicion. Now, let's reconstruct a moment. Not a famous date, not a coronation, not a battlefield with banners. A morning when the drainkeeper arrives at a junction and finds the bricks have shifted. The slope is wrong. Water pools where it should run. He tries to clear it, but the silt comes back too fast, heavier than last season. He reports it, perhaps to a foreman, perhaps to someone who handles labor assignments, perhaps to no one because no one in this world leaves us their titles in stone. The response is delayed. The repair that would have taken 2 men for half a day now takes 5 men and 3 days, because the river behaved strangely and the monsoon came in a rush and the city has 20 other failures screaming for attention. This is how collapse begins, not with a shout, but with a backlog. In the same week, the seal clerk presses his steatite seal into clay and feels something he cannot explain without admitting terror: the clay is poorer. The goods are lighter than they should be. The weight cube does not match the merchant's hand measure any longer. Someone argues. Someone offers a small gift to smooth the process. Someone else watches and learns that rules can bend. A system built on consistent measurement begins to leak legitimacy. And somewhere beyond the city, the caravan master hears that a familiar route is no longer reliable. A river crossing has shifted. A settlement that used to offer water now offers only brackish misery. Or a distant market, Mesopotamia, perhaps, has changed its appetite. Fewer orders, fewer premiums for craft. He does not announce collapse. He simply chooses a different path. And the city feels that choice like a missing heartbeat. Here is the pattern, the blueprint beneath the chaos, the thing I want you to recognize because it is not trapped in the Bronze Age. Urban systems don't just fail. They lose their margin for error. Indus cities were masterpieces of standardized order: bricks, weights, streets, drains. That standardization is a superpower in stable conditions. But it becomes a vulnerability when the environment and economy become noisy: erratic rains, shifting rivers, trade shocks, social strain. When your city is a finely tuned instrument, a small change in humidity can ruin the music. So let's walk through how the vanishing act works, step by step, with our hands on the evidence. Step 1. Monsoon variability and aridity episodes reduce reliability of agriculture and recharge of wells. That means not only less water, but less predictable water. Predictability is what allows specialization. If you can't predict food, you can't afford to have a large class of people who don't farm. Cities are, in part, a wager on predictability. Step 2. River channels shift or flood regimes change. Port silt. Field saline ice. Neighborhoods become unlivable. It might happen as repeated unusual floods that become the new normal, or as a slow drying that turns a reliable channel into a seasonal scar. You rebuild once. You rebuild twice. Then you realize you are repairing a losing argument with the landscape. At some point, the most rational engineering is retreat. Step 3. Trade shock. Fewer foreign demands and riskier routes mean fewer resources for public works and fewer profits for specialists. The beadmaker's furnace goes cold. The shell worker's knives dull and are not replaced. The seal carver sees fewer orders. The city's tax or tribute or communal storage, whatever form it took, thins. And when revenue thins, maintenance becomes triage. Step 4. Political fragmentation. This is crucial because the Indus world does not give us a king's propaganda. In Mesopotamia, a ruler would carve into stone, "I restored the canals, I fed the people, I defeated my enemies." Here, cohesion may have depended on institutions and norms, measure, maintenance, fairness, rather than divine monarchy. When norms fail, people stop cooperating at scale. Without a visible sovereign, legitimacy lives or dies in everyday competence. Step 5. Recomposition, not extinction. Populations disperse into smaller settlements. New crop strategies appear. Regional identities strengthen. The civilization disappears because it stops being legible as a single standardized machine. The ghost story is an artifact of our expectations. Now tally the cost, because transformation has casualties even when it avoids the spectacle of conquest. First, the loss of an urban literacy we still can't read. The Indus script remains undeciphered. That is not just an academic frustration. It is a library burned without fire, erased by abandonment, weathering, reuse of materials, and time's indifferent appetite. Entire debates, prayers, contracts, jokes, gone. Second, specialist collapse. Bead makers, seal carvers, standardized brick kilns, entire professions evaporate. Think what that means in human terms: apprentices who suddenly have no master, families whose identity was a craft, neighborhoods organized around production now reorganized around subsistence. It is not romantic. It is disorientation. Losing a profession is losing a future. Third, a change in risk psychology. After you live through hydrological betrayal, you stop betting your children's lives on a giant city grid. You favor mobility. You favor local knowledge. You favor redundancy. The mental map of safety changes. And once that mental map shifts, cities have to earn trust again from scratch. This brings us to the weird, untold truth that makes the Indus so difficult for modern storytelling. It may be history's most advanced boring superpower. No giant royal statues. No triumphal steely boasting of slaughter. No obvious imperial marching songs carved into temple walls. Instead, systems. Infrastructure. Standardization. That's why its end feels like a magic trick. We keep looking for a sword because swords leave dramatic scars. But systems can die without anyone swinging a blade. Now, I want to return briefly to Suspect A, the invasion story, because it lingers in popular memory like smoke that won't clear. Why does it persist? Because it gives us moral simplicity. They were killed. They were conquered. It was someone else's fault. Those are narratives that protect us from a darker possibility, that your own competence can fail you, that the thing you built can outgrow your ability to maintain it, that nature and economics can pull apart a society without any enemy worth hating. A villain with a face is comforting. But the evidence keeps pulling us back to infrastructure and ecology. The missing conquest signatures matter. The gradual, regionally varied changes matter. The shift toward localization matters. And the Indus's reliance on standardized trust, weights, seals, uniform bricks, makes it especially sensitive to disruptions that seem mundane until they cascade. If you want a single event, you may be disappointed. If you want a mechanism, you will find one in every drain and every well. The Indus collapse is not a cinematic ending. It is an audit. So picture Mohenjo-daro again, not as ruins, but as a living place at the edge of its patience. The brick streets are laid out in rational lines, the kind of geometry that suggests planners who believed order could be built. Water jars sit in courtyards. A public well is ringed with footprints, the ground packed hard by years of waiting. The air smells of damp brick and cooking grain. Somewhere, a child laughs. Somewhere else, someone argues over a measure. And overhead, clouds gather in a pattern that old men do not like. Because old men remember when the rains behaved. What happens when the well level drops by a hand's width? Nothing dramatic. Then it drops by another. People start rising earlier to draw water. Quarrels become more common. The grandmother insists the water tastes different. Someone gets sick. The drainkeeper notices more waste near the lanes because water is too precious to flush it away as freely. The mosquitoes arrive like an occupying force no one can see until they are already inside your blood. This is siege warfare conducted by neglect. At the same time, the caravan master counts his pack animals and decides whether this city is still worth the risk. Is the road safe? Will he be paid fairly? Will the city's officials, if that is what they are, honor weights and seals? Or has the city begun to improvise rules because it must? He thinks of alternatives, smaller towns, different routes, new partners. He does not hate Mohenjo-daro. He simply refuses to die for it. Markets are loyal only to stability. And the seal clerk, imagine him late at night, fingers aching, staring at the tiny signs carved into steatite that represent an entire civic philosophy. He has spent his life believing that if you can verify a transaction, you can hold a society together. What does he do when verification becomes contested? When people begin to say, close enough, because hunger has changed their ethics. Does he become more strict and provoke resentment? Does he loosen standards and accelerate the decline? This is leadership without a crown, choosing which rule to break first. That, right there, is the turning point. The moment the invisible infrastructure pact breaks, baked brick maintenance declines, standardized measures become less universal, and long-distance trade contracts. The city can't guarantee clean water, predictable food, and honest exchange at the same time. It must choose. And when a city that large begins choosing who gets reliability, it creates winners and losers do not stay quietly grateful. The grid becomes a map of resentment. Now we stand among the artifacts again. The seal. The clay ceiling. The weight. These are not quaint museum objects. They are the fingerprints of a system. In the mature phase, these fingerprints appear everywhere, uniformity across a vast region. In the later phases, the fingerprints blur. Different brick sizes. Different styles. Less standardized practice. When a system loses its uniform signature, it is either evolving or failing. And I can hear you asking the sharp question, if the Indus had such engineering, why didn't it centralize and force adaptation? Why didn't a king appear, rally labor, dig new canals, command migrations in an orderly way? It's a fair question, and it reveals our bias. We assume strong leadership looks like a singular person with a crown. But Indus governance, whatever its exact form, seems to have been distributed, institutional, coded into standards rather than carved into royal myth. That can be extraordinarily resilient in stable times. It can also be slow to respond when the threat is a cascade of small failures rather than a spear at the gate. Institutions are powerful, but they argue with themselves. So where do I land after the autopsy? Here is my verdict, delivered as cleanly as the evidence allows. The Indus Valley civilization didn't need a conqueror because its true battlefield was infrastructure. When water predictability, trade trust, and maintenance capacity failed together, the cities became liabilities. People didn't vanish. They relocated, localized, and reorganized, leaving behind an urban shell that looks like a ghost story. The streets remain because bricks last longer than social contracts. And because leaving is sometimes the most rational form of survival. Now, hold that up to the present, because history is not an anecdote. It is a force still acting upon us. Water politics today, river diversion, groundwater depletion, climate volatility, turn infrastructure into a front line without uniforms. When aquifers drop, when reservoirs shrink, when rivers become legal arguments rather than reliable flows, cities begin to negotiate with physics the way Mohenjo-daro did. The modern world is also a civilization of wells. Trade fragility when long-distance exchange contracts, war, piracy, sanctions, shipping shocks, specialized urban economies wobble fast. We have built glittering complexity atop assumptions of smooth logistics. When those assumptions fail, the first sensation is not drama. It's delay. Shortage. The feeling that something ordinary has become uncertain. Collapse often arrives as inconvenience before it arrives as catastrophe. Standardization as vulnerability. Our world runs on shared protocols, supply chains, digital identity, payment rails, measurements, certifications. When trust in the system drops, people fragment into smaller, safer networks. They hoard. They seek local substitutes. They reject distant authority. That is not a political slogan. It is a survival reflex. The Indus shows how quickly trust can become a casualty. And then there is the propaganda trap. We love a villain with a name, an invader, a king, a coup. But many collapses are bureaucratic, hydrological, and slow. That's harder to dramatize. It's easier to ignore until it happens to us. The Indus didn't leave us a conqueror's boast. It left us drains, and the warning inside them. If you want the truth, you have to learn to fear the mundane. So here is the unsettling question that refuses to leave me when I set the weight back down and brush the dust from my hands. If a million-person civilization can be defeated by maintenance failure and a moving river, what, exactly, do we think protects our own cities? Not our slogans. Not our pride. Only our ability to keep the systems we depend on honest, repaired, and adaptable. Join the investigation. If you want more cases like this, where we take a myth, put it under a forensic lamp, and rebuild the human story from the artifacts, subscribe to Archives of Humanity. Not for trivia. For pattern recognition. Because the past keeps running the same plays, and I want you in the war room when we spot them. And when this video ends, choose the next investigation on the end screen, keep the session going, because the clues across cases begin to rhyme. Before you go, answer me one legacy question, unsearchable, uncomfortable, and therefore useful. If you were the SEAL clerk, and you could feel trust dissolving, weights argued over, standards slipping, repairs delayed, what would you protect first, fairness, water, or trade, knowing that whichever you choose, someone you love will pay the price? Write your choice, and your reason, below.